So joining us on the podcast for the second time, my good friend Robert. Last time we were on, Robert, we spoke about Song of Blades and Heroes, miniature agnostic skirmish game. This time around I wanted to talk you through another game. It's called Rangers of Shadow Deep. It's a bit different because this one is like a solo cooperative, described as RPG light. I thought it might be right up your street, Robert. Thought we could maybe plan in a couple of wee games of it. So what are your initial thoughts, just having scanned over the book that we're about to go through?
Yeah, it looks really interesting. A slightly different take on the game we played last time. I'm really keen to get into it and see how it actually plays rather than just reading over it. I think I want to get a proper feel for it.
Yeah, it was written by Joe McCullough, who was a previous guest on the show, famously known for games like Frostrgrave, Stargrave. He's got a new one out at the moment, Silver Bayonet, which is like Napoleonics versus werewolves. But this was his attempt at a solo cooperative game. Joe's games are good because they do provide a setting, but he doesn't try and micromanage that setting. So, like, for example, you could play in a super licensed miniature game like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or that, and it's, the parameters of the lore are very hard and set. But with this, what we've been given is like a very typical sort of fantasy kingdom. And what's happened is we've got this region called the Shadow Deep. So it's like a big cloudy, dark sort of aura over the land, and it sort of keeps getting bigger, and it engulfs towns and kingdoms. That sounds a bit like Scotland, actually, the Shadow Deep.
Well, I'm looking out the window, and I think you're right.
Yeah, so we're potentially living in this realm right now. So what we've got in this world, we've got this sort of kingdom that's on the border of this Shadow Deep, maybe like a sort of Last Stand style place, and we've got these heroes called Rangers. So it's a band, it says here, it's a band of highly skilled warriors trained to operate independently or in small groups to track down and fight against the creatures of darkness. So these are the guys that we basically control. They go into this realm, and they've got set missions which you find in this introductory book, and you can buy expansions as well. So I think it's missions, and they're broken into scenarios, so it kind of tells you what you need for each one, and then you just set up the table and get to it. So we will get to like a couple of them towards the end of this episode. All right, so I'm looking at page 9 at the moment, Robert, if you're on the same page as me.
I am, I promise.
Cool. Before you dive in and start creating your ranger, there are several items you're going to need to be able to play and fully enjoy the game. A table, miniatures, a couple of 20-sided dice. Those are your favourite dice, aren't they?
They are.
Got a batch of them here. Yeah, 20-siders. A deck of standard playing cards, a ruler or tape measure marked in inches, a copy of the ranger sheet from the back of this book, and a pencil. Wonder if you could use a pen. Probably pencils are handy because you could rub stuff out like wounds and that, can't you? So
absolutely, I always turn up with a pencil and a sharpener when I go and play D&D.
A sharpener, that's good.
Yeah.
And would you add that to your character sheet as like a weapon?
Yeah, an improvised weapon, I think it would be.
So the miniatures as well, like I think the game was kind of written for 28mm scale, there or thereabouts, but he's saying here in the book there's no reason why you can't scale down or scale up. So it's not absolutely set in stone that you have to play with that scale. It's just the most common scale, I suppose. And like I say, we've got the 20-sided dice, which sometimes, incidentally, are used as like a random direction generator for the baddies. So obviously, like if you roll a 20-sided die, the top of it's a triangle. It's going to be pointing in a certain direction. So that's quite an innovative idea. Is that some common in games that you've played, Robert?
Absolutely not. No, I've never heard of that. Oh, but maybe in Warhammer back in the day. I can't remember, but that was a while ago.
When it was more sort of RPG than.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, that's an interesting one.
We use a deck of standard playing cards too, because these correspond to event tables. So that means that we've got the opportunity for things to happen, random events, or like as part of the mission, this or that. Maybe you're looking in a box, maybe you're investigating a clue. So these playing cards give us the chance then to have a unique experience rather than everything is just linear, and it's almost like playing through a storybook or novel rather than an actual interactive game. The table and the terrain, I think it's commonly 2.5 foot square, which is a reasonable size. I say a lot of folks. Some folks have like big 6 foot by 4 foot tables that they could play on, for mass battle games and stuff like that. When you see one of those tables in real life, it's really big. Like, don't know where you'd keep something like that.
Slide it under the snooker table or something, maybe. You've got me now using my hands to try and work out 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet, and that's not a bad size.
Aye, maybe one arm's length plus your body. I don't know if that would maybe be.
I mean, this is why they say have a tape measure, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Robert, you want to have a wee look at creating a ranger? On page 12 it talks about build points. We get assigned 10 build points to sort of customize our ranger, and we see there on page 13 the base stats. So what sort of stats are we getting with the ranger, like at its core? What have we got here on page 13?
Okay, so the ranger base stat line, you're looking at your movement, move of 6, which sounds all right, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, 6 inches. Yeah, fairly standard.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of D&D and the other likes, when you're playing a ranger, they tend to be able to move fairly well because they're used to being on the move in different terrains and stuff, I suppose. Fight +2, shoot +1, armor 10, and will +4, and health 18. There's your hit points. The will's interesting though, +4. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that comes into it, because it determines their courage, their ability to resist magic spells and the likes. So that's usually the kind of overlooked stat until somebody gets into the game, because they always put into fighting and defense, and then suddenly they realize they should have put more points into something like that.
Yeah, it's one of the ones I imagine people will overlook because it's not as immediately as attractive.
Yeah.
So it says here you can. So you've got these 10 build points, and you've got this naked, if you like, ranger just standing there completely in the buff, waiting to be assigned certain things. So 3 of those 10 build points you could put on this stat line, apart from armor. So you can't bump that armor up from 10. So you can increase any of the other stats by 1. So presumably you just can't stick those 3 points on fight and make it 5. I think you could only make it 3. You could probably make a move 7, shoot 2, will 5, or health 19.
Right.
That's how I interpret it here anyway.
Yeah, looks like that.
And then we've got heroic abilities and spells. So again, each thing that we do here makes the ranger more and more unique to us. So we can spend up to 5 of these build points purchasing heroic abilities and spells, and they're at a cost of 1 build point each. It says each heroic ability may only be purchased once. Each spell may be purchased as many times as a player wishes. So I think the spells, that means like if you cast a spell in the game, you maybe need more than one of them to cast it again. I don't know. It says spells are arcane powers that the ranger can call upon to strike down his enemies, heal his friends, and cause distractions. Unlike heroic abilities, a ranger must spend an action to use a spell. And then on the next page here, we've got the heroic ability list.
Yeah.
So again, I like stuff like this because it starts to make things really unique. It starts to give the characters a bit of that individuality rather than here's all just, the same pieces on the board and they all do the same things and it's just down to the dice and nothing else. Let's pick one each at random and just have a wee look at it. I'm going to look at Evade, which is the ranger may use this ability if he activates while in combat. The ranger may make a free 1-inch move to leave the combat. No figure may force combat during this move. After this move, the ranger completes his activation as normal. You got one there, Robert, that you want to take a wee look at?
Yes, roll with the punch. This ability may be used if a ranger loses a fight in hand-to-hand combat. So you get to halve the amount of damage taken by your ranger, rounding up. For example, if the ranger loses the combat and would suffer 7 points of damage, he only suffers 4 instead. So it looks like it's rounding up. And and not in your favour. But there you go. So that's a good one. If you think you're in a bit of bother and there's you're surrounded by 3 enemies and you think, right, I can't just fight my way out of this.
Yeah, so that was heroic abilities. There's a fair few more of them. You could get them at a point each. Looking at the spells, they're the same, a point per spell. I'll take a look at smoke here. The caster may place a thick cloud of smoke, 3 inch in diameter, anywhere within 3 inches. The smoke blocks all line of sight but does not inhibit movement. So that's one of the spells that you could potentially cast in the game. What about you, Robert?
Well, the one that's jumped straight out at me is Hold Creature, which will sound familiar to D&D players, especially because it incorporates the will that we discussed before. So the target creature must make an immediate will roll. If it fails, it may not force combat for the remainder of the turn, and it loses its next activation. And the spell has no effect on large creatures or undead, so no big troll type things.
Hold Creature in its mundane form is just a visit to the pet shop, just sitting, stroking a guinea pig.
Putting the lead on it.
Taking it out for a walk.
Until the end of the next turn.
So after the spells, so again, what we've got so far, we could spend 3 of these 10 build points on our core stats. We could spend up to 5 on heroic abilities and skills. And spells, heroic abilities and spells. Sorry if I've been saying skills already. It's one of the days.
Yeah.
Skills is the last thing. This is slightly different to the other ones because for each build point that you spend now, you can improve each skill 8 times, if I'm saying that right. So 1 build point equals pretty much 8 points to add to your skills. So are you seeing the skills list there on page 19, Robert?
Okay, so you've got acrobatics, ancient lore, armory, climb, leadership, navigation, perception, picklock, read runes, stealth, strength, survival, swim, track, and traps.
Yeah, so on your ranger sheet, these are all by default set to 0. So for 1 build point, 8 of these could be +1. For 2 build points, some of them could be +1. All of them could be +1. Some of them could be +2. So these come into play during specific scenarios where you're going to be asked to make a roll. And if you've done your preparation and maybe bumped your strength up a wee bit, or your survival or your swim, then that could potentially be the difference between making a successful roll or a fail when we get into the actual gameplay itself. So again, each page we go by, the ranger that we've built becomes more and more unique. The cool thing about, just going on to page 20 here, the cool thing about this game is you're not just working with your ranger and the ranger of the person that you're playing with or the people that you're playing with. You could recruit companions too. So, you could have a couple of guys backing you up, a couple of lackeys, which we'll get to soon. But it says all rangers start with 100 base recruitment points that they could use to select allies from the companion list. You can spend up to 3 of your build points to increase your base recruitment points. And each build point increases his base recruitment point by 10. So that's something we'll dive into in a wee minute. But first up, we've got weapons, armour and equipment. You like carrying weapons about in real life, Robert. So
improvised weapons for anyone, who works for enforcement agencies.
Page 22, you want to talk us through what the, again, not the descriptions, but the actual weapons that we could, or equipment that we could stick on the ranger.
Yeah, I see it's actually a mixture of weapons and armour as well. So you've got your bow and crossbow, classics for the ranger. The dagger, hand weapon, which includes all-purpose forged weapons that are commonly wielded in one hand. So you've got swords and, maces and stuff like that. Heavy armour, light armour, quiver, rope, shield, staff, throwing knife. You've got your two-handed weapons and unarmed. So that's an interesting one. Yeah.
think you could stick up to... This has nothing to do with your build points. I think you could just put 5 of these things on your ranger. And there's a couple of wee caveats here and there. Like if you're going the two-handed weapon, it doesn't look like you could carry a shield or vice versa.
Yeah.
So you're... Again, this is fairly common stuff. Like a figure that's carrying a shield receives +1 to its armor. The dagger, that's -1 to your damage because it's obviously just not very good. Heavy armor, that puts a +2 on your armor stat, but -1 to move. So that's stuff that he's not reinventing the wheel here. This is all pretty common in this style of game.
Definitely, yeah. This will be very familiar to anyone that's played any sort of games like this, I think.
And then we've got some magical equipment too. So how much can you stick on? I don't know if these are maybe things that you find rather than you equip them with at the start. It's again similar to the equipment, but just a bit more magical. And then we come on to the actual basic rules of the game. So like we've said before, 2.5 feet square table is common, although other sizes might be recommended depending on the scenario. Your terrain is just going to be anything that you've got of a sort of fantasy aesthetic, but you can use really simple stuff. Jenga blocks are commonly used by people that maybe don't have terrain collections. Bits of polystyrene, bits of cardboard. So you don't need a super fancy collection of stuff to enjoy this game. It could all be done by proxy and a bit of imagination as well.
Yeah, you can have undead climbing over the old PS3 that hasn't worked for a while, that sort of thing.
Yeah, upside down mug that hasn't been washed.
Yeah.
Some sort of fungal virus that you have to roll on as you pass it. The turn of the game, Rangers of Shadow Deep, is played in a series of turns. In each turn, a player will get the chance to take actions with his ranger and any companions, and any evil creatures on the table will do the same. So every turn is divided into 4 phases. We've got the ranger phase, the creature phase, the companion phase, and the event phase. So that's kind of the order that we play through. The ranger phase is self-explanatory. This is where our ranger will make their moves. So it looks like you get 2 activations. Just find the... Yeah, so here we are on page 26. It talks us through what we might be able to do. So movement's a very common activation. The interesting thing, that as far as I know, this is quite different. If you've got a movement stat of 6, if you want to move one of your activations, you could go 6 inches. But if you want to move a second time, that gets halved. So that would be another 3 inches. So maybe that's just, to sort of simulate them getting tired or that, or getting a bit more cautious as they come to the end of their move. But yeah, so if you've got a movement stat of 6 and you're moving twice, you're going to be moving 9 inches rather than 12 inches. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. That's interesting as well because, there's a lot of talk around how much you should be able to move in one turn. In other games like D&D, and if you move consistently in 6 turns in a row, you talk about exhaustion. That's if you sprint and stuff like that. So it's an interesting take on the management of creatures' movement in a game like this. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and the movement as well, it can be broken up. So if you're moving 6 inches, that doesn't need to be a straight line. You could maybe go 2 one way, 2 another, then 2 another, if you wanted to be super pernickety about it. But yeah, that way of breaking it up, maybe it means, it being a slightly smaller table than is common for this style of game, that your guy's not just running over the table like a pacey winger. He's not getting up and down the park and causing chaos. He's a bit more, you've got to be a bit more careful about thinking what you want to do with them.
Yeah, and changing direction comes into that as well. So that makes sense, because obviously you can't sprint and change direction and cover the same amount of ground as if you were going in a straight line, right?
And we've got all the sort of things you would expect around like obstructions, so terrain and stuff like that. And rough ground, there'll be modifiers if maybe your ranger has to go over like a swamp or climb a hill or stuff. There's going to be modifiers there. And when you move into base-to-base combat with a creature, you're basically engaging in combat with them. You need to spend an activation to actually fight them, but if you move into combat with them, when it comes to the creature phase, they're probably going to be fighting you, so you need to be quite mindful of that as well. We've got jumping moves as well, so you're able to do some jumping if you've got the terrain. We've got rules on falling as well, so you could take a bit of damage. And then getting back to the skills and the stat rolls, I talked about this a bit earlier. If you improve some of your skills, that will give you half a chance when it comes to making some of these rolls. So it says here, at various points during the game, a figure may be called upon to make a roll against one of its skills or stats. To do so, a player should roll one die and add his appropriate skill or stat to the roll. If the total equals or exceeds the given target number, and we see that throughout the rulebook as TN in capitals, then the figure has succeeded or passed the roll. If the roll is less than the TN, the figure has failed. So yeah, you're rolling your D20 now and then, and it will say, your target number here is 16, and you've got a +2 on whatever skill that is. So you'll be wanting to roll at least a 14 to pass that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So swimming, that follows that same sort of path. You've got a wee table there for, if you end up in some water, even you'll get modifiers based on your armour, or if you're carrying a shield or carrying treasure, that sort of thing.
I do think it's interesting that the companions go after the creatures, so that means you and your companions basically can't just wade in and say, right, well, before you do anything, we're going to kick the living corruption out of you.
Yeah, I think we bypassed it, but there is a group activation option where with companions who are close enough to you, you could move into combat with one or two of them and maybe gang up on something.
Yeah.
So there is the scope to do that. Again, I didn't want to get too into the weeds with the book because it's a chunky book, but yeah, so the Ranger's he's not constantly going to have to be totally on his own and his pals lagging miles behind him. So gives us a bit more flexibility too.
Yeah, I'm wondering if how many people might be thinking, do you know what? I'm just going to be really good at firing my crossbow, and my companions are going to be really good at fighting up close. And that suits me really well.
The combat is simple but effective. So we've got our D20 for a Ranger. We've got a D20 that we're using on behalf of the creatures. So both these die get rolled at the same time, and we add the fight stats plus any modifiers to what we rolled on the D20. Whichever figure has the highest combat score has won the fight. To see if the figure that has won the fight has wounded its opponent, simply take its final combat score, apply any relevant damage modifiers, e.g. for using a two-handed weapon or dagger, and subtract its opponent's armour stat. If the result is greater than 0, then this is the amount of damage that the winning figure inflicts upon its opponent. So we've got that health score or wounds. I can't remember if it was health or wounds, but obviously we'll be making some deductions there when people start picking up wounds. Mm-hmm. It gives a wee example here. Let's say a Ranger, fight plus 4, armour 12, is fighting a Gnoll. Fight plus 2, armour 11. The Ranger rolls a 16 and adds his fight stat for a total combat score of 20. The Gnoll rolls an 8, which gives it a combat score of 10. Since the Ranger's total score of 20 is higher than the Gnoll's score of 10, the Ranger has won the fight. To determine damage, the Ranger takes his combat score of 20 and subtracts the Gnoll's armour of 11 for a total of 9. Thus, the Ranger inflicts 9 points of damage on the Gnoll. This damage is then subtracted from the Gnoll's health, as explained in the damage section later in this chapter. If the Ranger has been using a two-handed weapon, plus 2 damage modifier, the total damage would have been 11. So is that pretty straightforward, Robert?
Yeah, adding and subtracting. It's all bread and butter to me. Yeah, pretty good. I'm getting very excited about this game.
Wee bit of maths, yeah.
Yeah, that's what gaming's all about, right? It's maths with imagination.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it.
What I like to call it. Yeah, I totally just made that up and didn't steal it. And it's imagination is what I call it. Which I didn't steal because nobody else would have come up with
that. There's some stuff around group combat. I don't want to get too much into the weeds with that. But again, it's going to follow that similar thing of if you've got more pals than he has, you probably win the fight. A couple of your friends could hold him down. You could rub dog shit in his face or that. And shooting, again, shooting is just pretty much the same as combat, apart from your opponent doesn't really get that chance to hit back. Unless they've got a bow of their own, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And the damage, we're just looking to keep track of that. I suppose for keeping track of damage, your opponents, for your rangers and companions, you're going to have your sheet. For the enemies, maybe just stick a die next to them, even a d6 if they're weak enough characters, just to keep track of how much wounds you've stuck on them.
Yeah, that could work, or like a separate sheet, I suppose. I mean, people will find their own ways. My worry is that the dice would get knocked over or something by knocking the table.
Suddenly get rolled, or they do look a bit cluttered. I found that about I quite like Kings of War by Mantic, which is a sort of Warhammer fantasy battle alternative, but you keep track of, I mean, I've not found a different way to do this, but you keep track of the unit's wounds with dice, and the table gets really busy. And it doesn't look great. It's a bit of theatre of the mind, but suddenly you're just looking at all these dice and wondering, what's available for rolling and what's actually a wound. So
yeah, and suddenly it doesn't quite look like a murky marsh and more like a soft play area with all these big colourful cubes around.
Aye, Bongo's soft play. Page 37, Robert, let's take a look at the creature, evil creature actions. You want to sort of talk us through what the gist of this is?
So in this game, which we'll remind people is Rangers of Shadowdeep, all the players are working together to support the forces of life. That's us, the good guys. And their opposition, the forces of evil and death, is controlled by simple sets of instructions that dictate how they move and fight during a scenario. So during their phase, the creature phase, every evil creature, and more rarely any good or non-aligned creature that is not under the direct control of the players, which is interesting, will activate. Creatures activate in order of their health, with the creature with the highest current health activating first, and so on. So that makes it easy to keep track of. And in the case of a tie, roll randomly. Every creature receives 2 actions every time it activates. Powerful creatures such as leaders, spellcasters, and large monsters will have a specific set of instructions given either in their description or in the scenario for how they will take their actions. Most creatures, however, will follow the basic action flowchart, which we'll have a look at as well. And essentially, whenever a creature activates, the player or players should follow this simple set of yes-no questions to determine what actions the creature takes. And in the extremely rare instances where these guidelines cannot be followed or don't make any sense to follow, just use your common sense. I like that.
Yeah,
So,
that's Joe's ethos with these games. Is these are guidelines rather than rules that you'll be jailed for if you don't follow verbatim.
yeah, and that's often
before we-
something that's overlooked in games like D&D and other stuff, where you've got to remember that the rules are entirely at the DM or whoever's discretion. If they say, "Nah, I'm not allowing that," and someone who really, really knows the rules inside out goes, "Yes, but I've figured out an exploit," and well, they don't say it word for word like that, obviously, but they're saying, "No, but I should be allowed to do this," and the DM says, "Nah," so common sense.
Yeah, because again, not to detract us, but I heard I can't remember what podcast it was on, but I heard an example of, I think it was a Warhammer 40k tournament, and obviously, you're getting people there that just aren't interested in any of the storytelling or the fun. It's just purely a winning endeavor. And I think there was some loophole which meant this guy was basically, he had a huge tank going into a building, going up the stairs and stuff like that. And if you're turning up to one of these games wanting the escapism and storytelling, you would never dream of doing that. But this guy's like, well, I can't see anywhere where it says I'm not allowed to do this, so I'm doing it. And that's a shame. That's a real shame.
For clarity, like in gaming terms, tank means heavily armored warrior at the front. But are you meaning an actual tank?
Yeah, a treaded, armored vehicle. So yeah, no, not just a like big Terminator or that. An actual tank. So
up the stairs.
Yeah, way up the stairs. Have a wee look under the bed. Rifle in the underwear drawer.
That's some staircase.
Yeah.
I take it couldn't get in the lift.
I know it was a bit too heavy, health and safety. So
Right.
before we dive into the wee table here, Robert, I was particularly interested in this aspect of the game because for AI systems for solo and co-op, this I think is, I know next to nothing about games writing, but I imagine this is the trickiest obstacle. Is, how am I going to make the enemies operate without them just being completely mindless? So if you take a wee look at this table, we'll see how it actually works then.
Yeah. So there's a series of questions here to help you determine what the mobs are going to do. Question 1, is the creature in combat? If yes, then it will use its action to fight. And if it wins the combat, it will choose to stay in combat and not use its second action if it has one. No, it's not in combat, proceed to step 2. So, it's not currently fighting. So, what is it going to do? Question 2, is there a hero in line of sight? If yes, and if the creature has a missile weapon, a bow, crossbow, even a throwing knife, and is in range, it will shoot at the closest hero. It will then use its second action to reload, if it has a crossbow, or whatever. Otherwise, it will not take a second action. If the creature does not have a missile weapon, it will move towards the closest hero. If this takes it into combat, it will use its second action to fight. If not, it will use its second action to move closer. So that's pretty clear. If it's not already in combat and it sees a hero and it's got a ranged weapon, it'll immediately start firing. And if not, it'll do everything it can to get into combat with the hero. That's straightforward. And number 3, so if it doesn't see, so if it doesn't see a hero and it's not already in combat, then number 3, does the scenario include a target point, which we could talk again about? If yes, the creature will use one action to move directly towards the target point. Return to step 2 to determine its second action. And if nothing in step 2, like is there a hero in line of sight, applies, the creature will not take a second action. If no, there's no target point, the figure will make one move, and this is what we were talking about before, in a random direction. So that's your die with the arrow on top and stuff. And return to step 2 to determine its second action. So at that point, it's if you get that far, then it's just moving around randomly until it sees a hero or whatnot. And for the first scenario or 2 that you play, you may find that you have to check this chart during every creature phase because you're still getting used to it. However, very soon you'll see that it follows a simple logical pattern. Is it fighting? Good. If not, can it see someone, shoot and move towards them? Good. And if not, then let's do the random dicey thing. And after your first game, you'll likely be moving the evil creatures around quickly without any need to refer to the chart at all. And that's quite often the case with a lot of this kind of stuff, that once you get the hang of it, you don't need to keep checking stuff. So that's good.
Yeah, you're playing the game, not the rules, as they say.
Yeah.
And I like that chart because it gives a bit of intelligence to your opponents. You're never, unless they bring in some sort of digital technology to these games, you're never going to get AI systems that are going to match up with playing a human opponent. But
hopefully,
I think this makes a great attempt at it. They're not just mindless, random rolling, pottering about, walking right past you. There's a bit of savvy there, isn't there? So
yeah, and it's something that game makers, and especially video game makers, have been fighting with for a long time, for decades now, is making enemies that aren't ridiculously overpowered, but also not easy to predict, and you just sort of stand, wait for it to come out from behind that tree after 3 seconds and kill it or whatever. And the unpredictability part is a big part of it, and it's good to see that they're addressing that here. And I really like the unpredictable part of the end there, where it will just move in random directions, and even if it's there, you can't just assume, right, well, I'll wait until it goes to the left 3 squares and I'll be ready for it.
On the next page, it mentions a bit about how you end the scenario. Scenarios can end in several different ways. First, a scenario ends immediately if there are no heroic figures left on the table, either because of being moved off the table or have all been killed. Otherwise, most scenarios last as specific numbers of turns. In a few cases, a scenario will be given specific conditions under which it'll end. So we'll take a look at the introductory scenario in a second, but first we get to companions. We're going to have a wee look at how we, the types of guys that we could take with us on these missions. So it says here, Robert, if we're because the amount of companions is based on how many human players are involved in the game. So if we were playing together, we would be allowed, I think it gives an example here. For example, let's take a ranger with 120 base recruitment points. If he was playing cooperatively with one other player, he would have 50 total recruitment points, which he could use to recruit up to 3 companions. So if we were playing together, we could spend those 50 points on up to 3 companions. If we go over to the next page, though, which is the companions list, we'll see that each one has a points list. So we might not actually want 3 because one that jumps out to me straight away here, the Barbarian, he's 35 points.
Yeah.
So you could probably fit in a couple of, I think on page 44, we've got a recruit at 10 points. So you could get a Barbarian and a couple of recruits, but the recruits, you look at their stats, they're pretty useless. I mean, if you just want a distraction, I suppose, somebody that you're prepared to just push out and hope that they get attacked before you do.
Hey, little Timmy, would you just walk through that door for a minute, please?
Yeah. So yeah, we see all these companions. They've got this. They've got these same stats as a ranger. Again, because we've got variety here. Some of them are really good at fighting. Some of them are very intelligent, but not so good at fighting. We've got varying levels of health as well, different weapons, and an archer. I imagine most people will want to take at least one archer. I would think. Does that sound sensible?
I think so. I mean, I know I went all in on getting people who could go up front and take the brunt of the damage, but when they die, then that's it. So having at least one support who can hang back and hopefully not die too soon is probably a good idea.
For the animal lovers amongst you, there's a section on hounds. You can take hound, warhound, bloodhound. They're pretty cheap, actually. The good thing about them, they'll give you a lot of speed. Not much else, to be honest. They'll give you a lot of speed, and they can't carry anything, so maybe that's why they're so cheap.
Yeah.
You can pick up a knight for 35 points, and he's looking pretty tidy.
Good thing is, if you're on your own and you can have up to 7 companions, and you can take 7 hounds.
Just a big, like Mr. Burns, release the hounds.
Yeah, exactly, and just swamp them. But the knight looks good because he's got an armor of 13. So, having him up front, he's, again, like the Barbarian, that's 35 points, which would only leave you 15. So maybe an Arcanist.
The rogue at only 20 points looks pretty handy when you see all the modifiers there, all the equipment and modifiers.
Once again, the rogues are the little the black horses of the getting things done.
Yeah, I mean he won't hang around once he sees that things are going badly for you. But if you're doing well, he's a good man to have beside you.
Yeah, or somewhere in the area where you can't see him.
Templar as well looks a bit like the knight, but very good if you just want to get stuck in. So we see there the types of companions that we could bring along on the mission, and then we've got a section here on the campaign, and this is another cool sort of aspect to the game because it's got that RPG feel to it that we're going to, at the end of a scenario, some miniatures might have been removed, companions or even your ranger, maybe they've been killed in the game, but they're not necessarily dead, because what's going to happen after the game is we're going to roll on this table. You see that survival table, Robert, on 46, page 46. You want to talk us through the outcomes there?
Yeah, so basically when you're determining what happens with the die roll, if you roll 1 or a 2, you're dead. 3 to 4, permanent injury. 5 to 6, badly wounded. 7 to 8, close call. 9 plus, full recovery. So, as ever, the rolling a 1 is a critical fail and you're out of the game, but also 2 as well. So that's interesting.
Let's take a look at this permanent injury table. Let's pick one each. I'll go with smashed jaw. So if we roll initially for that, if we roll a 3 to 4, we're going to then roll on the permanent injury table. So if I was to roll a 3 or 4, and then on the permanent injury table I was to roll a 17 or 18, my ranger's got a smashed jaw, or my companion. I don't know if this applies to companions. I'll need to look into that. Smashed jaw. The figure suffers a broken jaw that never quite heals properly. The figure has some difficulty with speaking, which affects its ability to lead men in combat. He'll just need to take women with him then. It goes on to the second page there. If the figure is a ranger, yes, so this does apply to companions.
Yeah.
The player may only activate one companion in the ranger phase instead of the usual 2. Furthermore, the ranger suffers -3 to leadership skill rolls. I've just got the visions of the guy, and he just can't speak anymore.
Talking out the side of his mouth.
And he's got his recruit, he's maybe tying his lace, and he's going, and there's this fucking demon behind him who's about to make mincemeat out of him. But
what's that, sire? There's a what behind me? Perhaps use sign language, sire.
This injury has no specific penalty for a companion, but it does not gain experience for the scenario just played. You got a permanent injury. Let's laugh at permanent injuries. You got one you want to highlight, Robert?
Yeah. Well, it was the one that stuck out to me was never quite as strong, which has a certain flavour. It could be. Is it physical? Is it psycho? Oh no, there is a psychological scars. Gee whiz, this is getting into detail. So never quite as strong due to internal injuries. The figure never quite returns to full health. It starts every game at -1 health. The injury can be received twice with a cumulative effect of -2 health. Any further never quite as strong results have no effect. Oh well, so by that point you're indestructible. Oh no, you're as weak as a kitten.
Back to Mr. Burns. 2 Mr. Burns references. Who knew?
I know.
Who knew that he would get such an outing in this episode about Rangers of Shadow Deep, the miniature game. On the next couple of pages, we've got a lot of stuff around Ranger levels, skill updates. Again, all the stuff you're going to see in campaign-based kind of RPG style games. As your character, the more you play it, the better he gets. Hopefully he doesn't get the smashed jaw. We've got rules on companion progress and also treasure. The booty, the stuff you're going to pick up on your missions, or hopefully pick up, that are going to come in handy for
medical costs
for future missions. Yeah. So next few pages, there's just quite a lot about that. We've got a weapons and armor table. That will be. Maybe that's things that you found. Some magic items. Gloves of climbing, I wonder what they do. Boots of soft tread as well. Not very descriptive. No idea what that would do.
They're slippers, I think, just for comfort at night.
Yeah, there's absolutely no benefit to wearing them when you're fighting a dangerous monster in a dark hellhole.
Yeah.
But I want to nip over to page 57. We'll just take a look at the first mission.
I was just picturing there, if I can say, that a ranger getting to level 75 and he's really, really powerful, despite only having one eye, half a jaw, some fingers missing on his left hand, and only 1 foot and stuff. But hey, don't get into a fight with him because he knows stuff.
Yeah, by that time it's his reputation. People are saying the stuff that's happened to him, and he's still there and he's still up for it. So
yeah, old one-eyed Karnak or whatever. Yeah, he knows his stuff. Plus, he has 7,000 companions now, so
an absolute army of people.
Yeah,
you can't talk to them, obviously, but this time we've got internet technology in the realm. So
yeah,
he's got a WhatsApp group
that he types with his left hand.
Yeah, And he's got a very strong monocle covering his right eye as well. Page 57. Did you flick forward to that?
I am. I'm here. I'm right with you.
So this is the first mission that we get presented with, sort of introductory mission as well. So hopefully nothing too difficult. It's just designed to give us a flavour of moving the pieces about, how everything works. And the miniatures that we'll likely need for this mission, which I think is broken up into 2 scenarios, which we'll dive into. 6 plus zombies. So assuming 6 is your sort of minimum that you're going to need. 3 plus giant rats. 6 plus giant spiders. And 3 plus survivors. That little bit in italics there, Robert, it has been less than. Do you want to just read that for us?
It has been less than a week since the destruction of Laurentia and the appearance of the Shadow Deep. But in that time, the world has seemingly gone mad. Reports of strange creatures and evil robed men are flooding in from all along the new border. Even with every soldier, ranger, and volunteer mobilized, the kingdom is stretched thin. 3 days ago, a veteran ranger, by the name of Aventine, went out to investigate reports of an attack on a nearby village. He has not returned. Determined to find the missing ranger, you have gathered what companions you can and set off for the village. It's an 8-hour hike over difficult terrain.
An 8-hour hike, that's going to... I've done a few, sort of 4-hour walks in my time, and I'm a pretty fit guy, but a 4-hour walk's tough. And, I could just imagine doubling that, and you're on your way to fight something. Probably.
To be fair, they won't be drinking tins of lager as well on the way.
Yeah, aye. Seeing as you did such a good job of that, read, Robert, we've got another one there. So we're on to page 58. Scenario 1, the deserted village.
Right, here we go. 8 hours and we're not dead yet, so that's good. As soon as you come within sight of the nameless village, you knew that something wasn't right. There was no sound of man or animal. No movement except for the gentle swaying of the trees in the breeze. Closer in, you could see bodies lying in the dirt and smell the stench of death. Undaunted, you covered your face and carried on. Whatever happened here, it was your duty to try to discover the truth and, if possible, determine the fate of Aventine. You had just reached the center of the village and were about to split up to search when a horrible moaning sound came from all around. That's it. You've tripped it. You've pulled the mobs, and it's trouble time.
Yeah, excellent. We've set the scene here, and we get a little setup guide. This scenario should be played on a 3 foot by 3 foot square table. The rangers and companions should all be placed within 3 inches of the central point of the table. 4 or 5 small buildings should be placed around them in a rough circle. No building should be closer than 6 inches to the nearest hero. The rest of the table should be covered in scattered trees, rocks, and possibly a small screen. Stream even, not a screen. That's the WhatsApp group again.
Yeah.
So we've got a little map down the bottom that kind of gives you a guide of how you might want to set that out. And you could see that we're putting zombies in certain places. We've got giant rats in certain places, and we've got clues as well. And the clues kind of tie into the clue marker table, which we see on the next page, and that's based on the D20. So, as you would expect, when you're getting to these clues, you're going to, I think, spend an activation to make a roll and just see what you've found. And, without giving anything away, any spoilers, some of the stuff you might turn up in the clues is very good, and some is very, very bad. So the clue markers are there. We've got some special rules as well. Before the scenario begins, choose one figure to make a perception roll, target number 8. If successful, you may move one of the clue markers that is not a house 6 inches directly towards the figure. So we see there a little hints of the benefits of improving certain skills when you're building your ranger as well.
Yeah.
We've got on page 60 there, we've got event cards. Yeah, so that's where the actual deck of playing cards comes in.
Nice.
So we're drawing these event cards. different things are happening. For example, red 4, zombie, place a zombie adjacent to one randomly determined clue marker. Or red 9, disease, any figure that is reduced to 0 health during this scenario must make a health roll, target number 16, or suffer from disease in the next scenario. Use a figure's starting health to make this roll. So just loads and loads of different variability, and means that you could probably play this numerous times and it be completely different as well. Be you playing alone, mixing up your ranger, you could create a completely different character, you could have completely different companions. So the replayability of this just looks like you're really going to get your value for money, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I really like how the cards, the red ace to the red 9 there gives you a lot of different options there. Well, not options, but you don't know what you're going to get. Like the giant rats, the zombies, and even the disease. And I like that one there, collapse, red 7. One of the buildings determined randomly collapses, and any figure in or within 2 inches of it suffers an immediate +4 attack.
Yeah, just sounds like a pretty hellish place, like we've mentioned before. Very similar to the fine country that we live in.
Yeah.
So I don't want to spoil all these scenarios because one flows into the other. I think by talking through that first one, it gives the listener a flavour of and us a flavour of how these sort of scenarios play out. Really looking forward to getting a wee game of this, Robert, in the next couple of weeks. I've got everything we need. I just need to do some painting. In fact, now that I mention it, in that little link that I sent you, there's 4 different potential rangers. These are miniatures I bought recently. So I want you just to flick through them and tell me like which ranger you would most like to play out of these 4 guys. And talk us through as well what you're seeing when you look at each one.
Okay, so contestant number 1, he's got his hand axe and shield, and he looks like the Black Knight from Monty Python's The Holy Grail, so he looks like he's not a literal tank like in some games, but a tanky.
Yeah, I was going
to
ask, is that kind of what you meant by tank? The heavily armoured kind of, doesn't look like he's going to be easy to put down, but he's also not going to be breaking any land speed records.
Yeah, absolutely. He's the one that he wants you to attack him so that his friends aren't getting squished, basically. And
he probably isn't passing any maths tests either.
Yeah, no, he has his skill set, and that's what it is, and that's that. Number 2, Scottish guy, possibly.
Yeah, kind of druidy guy, isn't he?
Yeah, he's got the sandals, the long red hair and beard.
Bone necklace.
Oh, yeah, definitely druidic. I'm not sure what's in his... Oh, he's got a sword kind of behind his back. So
yeah, and a kind of hook on his belt as well. Don't know if that's a climbing hook or a sticking in a head hook, or maybe a bit of both. Maybe it's a versatile tool.
Yeah, like a sickle-y type thing. I didn't see that at first, but yeah, you're quite right. So he looks like he's maybe got a bit of dexterity about him as well as fighting ability.
Yeah, a bit more clever, I would say.
Yeah.
A bit more arcane.
Yes. And number 3, there's absolutely no mistaking who he is. He's got the black hood up. He's got a dagger in his left hand. He's wearing leather, and let's say the look on his face is he's not a people person.
He's the guy in, like a game like Skyrim or that, where you're in the tavern and you get the psst. He just appears after you've triggered something else in the game, and he's come up and he's got an offer for you. But if you take him up on this offer and do his bidding, your karma is going to take a little plunge.
Yeah, and he may or may not betray you ultimately. Yeah,
that look on his face doesn't strike me with trust. He's kitted. He's well kitted out. He's got a crossbow and everything. So probably the most equipped guy I've seen so far.
Yeah, he's not somebody you would lend money to or ask to babysit your kids, I don't think.
The 4th guy's not too dissimilar, is he? I think he's classed as a half orc as well.
He's got a bit of a snarl to him, yeah. Similar to the first guy, but maybe slightly less clever, which might be the orc influence. Just going off the look on his face, he's got a crossbow hefted over one shoulder, which probably takes a bit of strength. He's got a dagger in his left hand and a sword across his right leg in a scabbard.
Yeah.
So,
he's not lacking in gear. Not knowing anything about crossbows, I'm assuming he would need to put the dagger away to fire the crossbow, but then the crossbow's over his shoulder now, so it's not really in use.
Well, in D&D, certainly, it depends. If it's a heavy crossbow, then 2 hands, that's that. Light crossbows you can fire with one hand, but I think you'd need a second hand to reload it and stuff like that. So, but that one looks like half his entire height and weight, so I'm going to say it takes 2 hands.
So what guy appeals to you the most here? Which one would you like to take into the Shadow Deep? As
an actual ranger?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe the rogue, to be honest.
The third guy, he's quite an appealing character, isn't he?
Although I'd like to know more about your arcane chap as well. So maybe one of those two, probably the rogue, and then once I've got a feel for the game, then the arcane. What is he, an arcane something?
Like a druid. I think he's a druid, yeah. The second guy, the bearded sandals guy.
He looks like if Socrates was in Braveheart.
These miniatures, just in case the listener is interested, and I'll put links in the show notes at bedroombattlefields.com, but these are from otherworldminiatures.co.uk. So very good range there, although a bit miffed at their postage and packaging, because the more you buy, the price of the postage goes substantially up, which I get from a weight point of view, but postage costs don't jump up that much because like miniatures aren't very heavy. So I bought those 4 to keep it under 20 quid, because after that you're like adding another, I don't know, $2.50 onto the postage, maybe even another $5, I can't remember, but it seemed to be a bit of a funny way of doing it, almost saying, don't buy too much from us, which I thought was weird.
Well, so, I'm surprised at that then, because I mean, minis, obviously you've got a base cost to posting anything, but I wouldn't have thought they would.
Yeah, like £3 or something.
Yeah, £3 and another £1 per extra mini would seem fair to me.
Aye, well, if you're listening, Otherworld Miniatures, your ranger's great, but your postage system is a bit flawed. So, maybe fix that. I'll maybe send them an email or something, like they're going to listen to me.
Maybe.
I'm running out of time, but I've thoroughly enjoyed that, Robert. I've been poring over this book for a good week now. I'm really looking forward to just getting these wee guys finished, and we'll get together for a wee game up at the office and play out that zombie scenario, the deserted village, I think it was called.
Yeah.
And see how we fare. What are your thoughts?
I love the idea of this game, probably even more than the last game we played. Just because of the flavour you can add to individual characters. Whereas before you've got control of 10 and it's hard to love them all at once or even get to know who they are. Whereas with this one, I really like the individual character creation side of things.
Strong narrative, isn't it?
Yeah, and I wonder if chess would be more popular nowadays if you could make one of your knights have double movement, and stuff like that. And
or he had to roll on a wooden table.
Yeah, and ranged attack from your king. So he's like, stay away from me. I've got a high armor class. But no, in all seriousness, I really like the look of this one, and I'm genuinely looking forward to playing it.
Yeah, and we'll get together on the mic after we've had a game, and we'll report back for the listener on how we got on with that.
Absolutely.
And I'll put the show notes and all the links and everything about this episode, where you could actually find Rangers of Shadow Deep for sale. We'll put the show notes. We'll put a link with bedroombattlefields.com/Rangers. We'll go with that. And you'll find everything you need to know there. Other than that, thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Robert, for being involved.
Thank you.
And stay subscribed, or if you're not subscribed already, please do subscribe. And we'll see you on the next episode.